Alright, hello everyone and welcome to yet another episode of Theorycrafting Thursday. I'm your host, Ursinity. I'm sitting here with my co-host, Proud. Alright, and today we're going to be doing a very special episode. It's something we have not done before, and if you listen to Tuesday's episode, you will you'll have a hint. But we're going to be doing drafting today, and we're going to be talking about a few different drafts, and just talking about drafts in general. This is an area we have not explored before. Obviously, we've talked about it in general terms, and we've done a lot of, obviously, duos, which has a role in drafting, but we figured it'd be more productive, and it'd be a good change of pace to talk about full 5-man versus 5-man drafts, and also bans, of course. And I know, Proud, this is something you're definitely better than me at, and you're more specialized, you're more interested in it. So
Yeah,
this is...
I've wanted to be a good drafter for a really long time, because hence this show, I think kind of the coolest part about Dota is just all the thought behind it. I've been in a few teams, nothing crazy or anything. I think I scrimmed with Boreal once in my entire life, maybe, but I'm not sure if we actually did that. Anyway, but yeah, I've always been super interested in drafts, but I've never been really good at it until I guess the last couple of patches have been okay. So wanted to kind of talk through the development of drafts, the difference between drafting amateur and people who just copy the pros, or the pros who are kind of trailblazing what does make the real meta competitive drafts.
Yeah, I think that's I think drafting is really interesting. I've not done it in a competitive sense before, but it's always been something I've been interested in. I really like hearing people like Winter, he's the first one that comes to mind, talk about drafts when I'm listening to commentary. It's always fun to think about Dota, like you say, and that's the whole point of the show. And as entertaining as it is to think about a duo lane or a tri lane or whatever, when you think about a whole draft, it really changes the dynamics overall. And then even past that, when you think about a whole draft relative to an opposing draft during a captain's mode match, where you're building your draft not only relative to your own ideas, but relative to their ideas and what they're trying to implement, and what you're thinking they're going to be trying to implement, that changes a lot of things. So it's super complicated. And there's just so much room for thought, and so much room for you to mess up and throw the game. There's definitely a lot of pressure that comes upon the captain, as I'm sure you know. And that's generally why I try to avoid being captain, if we're being honest. But it is a good time every once in a while, especially when you win with it. When you make that good draft and you're like, boy, that was awesome. I did so well.
Yeah, the only other thing is, sometimes I draft Lone Druid, so I'm never really sure that's not really a good draft if I were to look at it objectively in any sense. But that's part of drafting, is sometimes you need to make what isn't a good meta decision, but for your team is the correct decision by far.
Yeah, that's like a really valuable point. And I know before we even talk about the drafts, I'll just say 2 of them are amateur drafts, and then we have, or 3 of them are amateur drafts, even.
Potentially 4, who knows? Fuck.
Yeah, we can always add more. But we have 3 amateur drafts, 2 from Proud's team games, and then 1 from one of the .p AD2L matches. And then we also have a pro draft to compare some of the differing drafting patterns, drafting decisions, etc. But yeah, so, the big thing about drafting, in my mind, when you're talking about, especially at an amateur level, like, you have to take into account your people, like who's on your team, and you can't just absent-mindedly pick the stuff that, Puppy picks.
Sure.
The stuff that works for other people is not necessarily going to work for you, right? So, if you see, using your example, if Boreal runs some crazy draft and they completely stomp, that does not necessarily mean that, your team could pick that same draft and just stomp over an opponent. You have to have similar play styles, and that's why heroes like Lone Druid, Lone Druid mid wouldn't work for a lot of teams. But if it works for your team because you play it, then it's a good draft in terms of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the idea of, so the way I think that most people, when you get a new team, a good place to start is looking at the pro stuff. And actually, I would like to go into the pro draft before we go into the amateur ones. But So you start with like, okay, this is like what's meta. This is what is, if we were all players that were equally good with every hero and every role, like this would probably be one of the stronger things we can run, right? And then after you look at that, you say, okay, can like our carry player play gyro? No, our carry player can't play gyro. Okay, so we need to like shift more towards the less early fighting like kind of heroes. So maybe if our carry can't play gyro, then we're not super worried about whether or not our mid can play Shadow Fiend. So you just kind of got to look at like what can I play in the meta, and then what can I not, and then kind of draft to those strengths. So you let the meta kind of guide you a little bit, give you a good starting point, but then every good team has to diverge from that because I mean no team is perfectly meta. Cloud9 first picks Ember Spirit safe lane. That's not meta. That's just or sorry, not Cloud9, Secret. Eternal Envy is no longer in Cloud9. But yes,
Yeah.
and one of the best teams drafts something totally weird whenever they can. So there's definitely a lot of merit to playing towards your player's strengths.
Yeah, I think even before the draft begins, at one point you and I were playing around with making a team. I don't even remember. Or you were making a team or something, and at some point you had like a whole spreadsheet that I had to fill out, and that was like easily one of the most valuable things I've done really to think about Dota, and especially as like a captain. Because then later, when I was captaining a We Like Dota League team, I did a very similar thing. Or when I was helping some of the .p teams strategize, and just having like a list where it says, rank your top 10 heroes, like for the position you're playing on the team. So like, if you're the one role carry and you say like, all right, my best hero is Naga, my second best is AM, etc. That's like a super valuable thing. Even before like you start thinking about drafts, that gives you something to reference. And so I think that's like super valuable as like a point of advice for any team. Like instead of sitting in the draft and saying like instead of
You
being
play
in the
Jakiro?
draft, exactly.
Did someone play Jakiro? Is there anyone who plays Jakiro here?
Yeah, because that's just
Yeah.
so much wasted time and so
Yeah,
much
absolutely.
effort. Like you could just avoid it by saying like just having a sheet that says like even if it was just a checkbox like yes or no, can you play Jakiro and have your support player check yes or no, and then you just look at that. You say, all right, I don't need to ask him this question. I already have that information internalized or at the ready, and it just makes things so easy.
Yeah, I definitely if you are making a team or anything like that, even just amateur, that's actually the most fun you can have in Dota is just like actually trying hard, even in like an amateur competition, and kind of getting your bearings there. But yeah, making a sheet and having like I just have a Google Doc sheet. It's just a sheet, and it's like fuck it, what heroes can you play? There's a lot of other stuff on it, but ranking your top heroes and what roles really helps everyone hash things out pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's the core. I remember you had like an area for pocket strats or like drafts you wanted
Yeah,
to run, and then some other stuff.
it's like
But
specific heroes you think are strong in general that we should draft, little
yeah,
like small synergies. Yeah, and then I had a whole thing of scratch paper. It was fun.
yeah, no, it was really interesting. And yeah, like I said, like even like that was a little complicated, but even for like a microcosm of that, like if you're an amateur team, just have your players be like, all right, write your top 5 heroes, and even if they're your friends, they may like, and you think you know them and their playstyle, like they may write things that you did not think of. Your friend may really like playing Naga as a carry, but he never does in the games with you, just coincidentally. So you might not know that, and so you may think like, oh, well, we can't draft that. So that's super valuable.
Yeah, yeah. Like one of the things there is like I'm a pretty good alchemist player right now. I mean, he's obviously a kind of joke hero right now, but I'm
Yeah,
like pretty good at him. And our mid player, he wanted to be mid, but then it turns out when I looked at his sheet, none of the heroes that he said he was really good at were mid heroes. So we figured out, okay, so if it's a good game for alchemist, I'll pick alchemist to go mid, and then he'll like play whoever he said he can play mid in the safe lane where they actually belong.
yeah, yeah. Definitely, I've noticed similar things, and there are a few pro teams, I'm sure, that do that kind of role swapping thing. Like
Yeah,
EG comes to mind, where like they'll have Arteezy mid sometimes on certain heroes. Like
yeah.
remember recently, Sumail plays a crazy Timbersaw, so they had Sumail play Timbersaw, and then they had Arteezy say mid with like a Tiny. So like that's one of the advantages when you have people that have versatile hero pools or role capabilities, is that you can say like, oh well, our offlaner doesn't play Timbersaw, but our mid does. So we put our mid on our offlane, then our offlane plays the hero that he could play mid. So
Yeah.
that definitely adds an extra level of like I think versatility is key, and having to draft around somebody that plays a very limited hero pool, it adds a lot of unnecessary problems, I think,
And
and all restrictions.
I think that's slightly different in pros. Like, yeah, there definitely are examples of like, the mid and safe laner switching it up. Like if you're playing Tiny Wisp, your safe laner is probably a little better at, playing Tiny Wisp than and synergizing with the support than your mid player is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like in general in pros, they try to keep one person playing off lane, one person playing safe lane. But that's because like that's what they've been practicing for their last 5 years of their Dota career when they've been trying to make it as a pro off laner. But in the amateur scene, it's not like you can just queue up for a pub and get mid every time. Because when I was trying to practice mid, that was definitely not the case, and I got a lot of 3 people mid games.
Oh yeah.
So your players are always going to be a lot more diverse. So it's I think in amateur it's better to kind of draft around the heroes that people are comfortable with, and just like whatever role they want to do it, that there's some comfort for you. Like you kind of want to start where the meta is, but then you absolutely do need to take a page out of your own player's book instead of the meta, and let that kind of guide you from there.
Yeah. So I mean, just to jump into one of our amateur drafts, I think this is a good jumping off point. We have a .p tryhards draft versus it's an 80-12 game, and they picked Faceless Void, which for Wazoo, which is one of his big comfort heroes, I know. But it's not a hero we almost ever see in pros or in even amateur tournaments by teams that are focusing on the meta. Because like we said, Faceless Void, I can't even think of the last time I saw him in a pro game. But it worked out because that's a comfort hero for Wazoo, and it works out for their draft. And if your drafter knows that, like, they're not strictly drafting around the meta. They're drafting like, oh well, like it can work here, and he really likes the hero, so let's just pick it.
Yeah.
And like Lycan is another example of that. Thinking about Wazoo specifically is like Lycan is not a super meta hero at all, but if you're comfortable in the hero, it works out.
Actually, another small thing here about that specific game. So they draft Faceless Void, and they're against Ember Spirit. And in normal games, I would say, all right, Ember Spirit like beats the shit out of Faceless Void. Like Faceless Void tries to chrono him in the fucking animation time. Ember Spirit presses D and clicks the ground, and he's out of there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're at like a lower tier where people's reactions aren't quite as polished, like Faceless Void can counter Earth Spirit because you can catch him in the chrono. He doesn't have reaction time to get out of it in time. So
yeah,
there's a bunch of like. As you go down in the skill cap, the interactions between the heroes, like who beats who, can kind of flip pretty easy. Like I would say at a low level, Shadow Fiend beats the shit out of Ember Spirit. But if you're decent at Ember Spirit and you can dodge one of the raises with Sleight of Fist, then you can kill Shadow Fiend.
Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of matchups like that. Like Ember Spirit TA is one of those matchups I think of, being that I play quite a bit of both of those heroes, where Ember Spirit can just be punched to death by TA if the Ember Spirit player is worse than a TA. But on the flip side, the Ember Spirit does so many instances of damage, he can just wreck a TA if the TA player is bad. So
yeah, I mean that's just like a fucking knife fight between those two heroes.
So I think that's like a really good example of the dynamic where, unless you're talking about like top tier play, you can pick a lot more things are viable, and I think that's really the crux of it. A lot more things are viable if you are worse. Like, let's see, this is not one of the drafts we're going over, but I played in the Dota Master Race charity tournament with whose team was it? It was Wrath's team. He's a .p regular, and we got rolled in the finals. We made it to the grand finals through a bunch of happenstance and also some good play. But we got rolled by a mid AM who went like, what was it? He did the like Phase Boots Earn Sanjin Yasha E-Blade build. And it was just because he was just way better than us. Like the other team was all 5K players, and we were a bunch of like, I was the highest on the team at like 43, and the rest of them were like 35. So it was just like, obviously that's not a viable strat. But when you're like significantly different skill levels, anything can work.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think like, I mean, Lone Druid is a really good example of this, right? Is your Lone Druid skill is so much higher than like the average, like let's see, what's a good way to word it?
If hero MMR was in the game, my Lone Druid MMR would be way higher than any other of my heroes MMR.
Yeah. or like Dota buff rankings. I suppose would be a good example. Like if the average ranking is, I don't know, Platinum 5 at like our skill level, because that ranking is kind of based off of who you play against. Your lone druid would be like, I don't know, Diamond 1 or something. Or is Diamond higher than Platinum? I can never remember.
I have no fucking
It should
idea,
be.
dude.
Or Platinum 9, whatever. But basically the idea is that relative to skill level, something that normally would not work does work.
Yeah.
And I think another example of that would be like, I don't know, sometimes you win disadvantaged matchups. Like think about mid specifically.
Yeah, like I killed a Razor. Like that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah. And those are always the times where you're just like, boy, I should not be winning this game, but either they're really bad or I'm playing really well. Because, I mean, everybody does just have those games where they're playing out of their minds. They're super happy about it. And then you also have those games where the enemy mid is just, like, completely incompetent, or the offlaner just feeds a bunch. Like, the offlaner is playing Brood and just feeds you Spiderlings. Like, sometimes those things just happen.
Do you want to go into the secret Mineski game?
Sure, yeah. Okay.
Just kind of want to talk about because this is a pretty good example of sorry, this is secret versus. This is on YouTube, by the way. Secret versus Mineski Game 1 upper bracket quarterfinals. Pretty simple to find.
It's a really good game. Probably one of the best games of the tournament so far, in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. I watched
Which is
most
super
of the
cool
games.
for Mineski because they've. I mean, that brand has been trying so hard, and they're finally really like getting some recognition.
Pinoy Dota.
You.
Okay, all right. Well, so for anybody who didn't see this game, it was a really good game. It was like almost an hour long. Do we want to do it in order, or should we just talk about some big points? Maybe order might be best.
Yeah, in order is good. I like to just kind of go through the process of it.
Right. So Mineski had first pick, I believe, and they did the classic.
No, it looks like that was a secret here.
Okay. Well, Secret had first pick. And oh yeah, that's why Mineski banned Doom. So we saw pretty common bans. I think banning in the first phase is probably the least interesting part of drafting. I don't know if you do.
Well, so actually, I was going through this, and it looks like so what Secret did is their first 4 bans were all the heroes that that Mineski played in like their last match.
Oh.
Or something like that. Like they played these 4 heroes all together. So Secret was specifically like, okay, this is your most successful strategy. We're going to take out your first 2 picks, and then we're going to take out your second 2 pick, or your 3 and 4.
Yeah, I know Mineski was really wrecking with Huskar, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so they take out the Dazzle first to try to be like, okay, if you guys really want the Huskar, you can first pick it, and then we have like a bunch of picks to counter it. And then they didn't go for that, and then they say, okay, so you can't fucking have it at all.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, and then, I mean, kind of in my vein of Mineski's bans, we see probably less, like they didn't just ban one of Secret's draft, they banned Doom Slardar first phase, and Doom
To be
Slardar
fair,
are
though,
2 like incredible heroes. Also, I mean,
Slardar
Secret
is
does play
here
a lot of
because
Slardar.
of Secret. Slardar is so highly rated because Secret brought that in.
Yeah.
So there is something to say, like, I mean, obviously, I think it's more like, rather than just the stuff that they're good with became meta, I think it's a little bit of they discovered the meta by getting Slardar up there. Like, he's definitely objectively a good hero. But a lot of that was that they run it so successfully that made people believe that it was as strong as they thought.
Yeah, interestingly, we've kind of seen him taper off in the last couple days of the tournament, where like he was like top tier first pick first ban by a lot of teams, not just Secret, for like the first few days, and now in the like, let's see, as when we're recording this, it's up to the semifinals, and so today I know I didn't see like any Slardar, and yesterday I think it was like kind of hit or miss, whereas in the first few days it was like 100% pick ban almost.
Yeah, well, part of the reason that he got big was because, I mean, he counters Alchemist and he counters Doom. And he works well with a few heroes. He obviously has some synergies going on, like Slardar, Wind Ranger. I mean, that's amplify damage, focus fire. That's one dead motherfucker.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, yeah, he kind of got brought in as a counter to the meta. But now that meta, like the old meta, is kind of gone, like people aren't picking Alchemist, and Doom is always getting banned. So Slardar's place isn't quite as much there. And I think heroes like Darkseer are gonna get a lot more priority as far as offlaner picks instead of Slardar in the days to come.
All right, so just to go over this draft, we saw Secret. Their first pick was Ember, which generally I I think that would fall under the realm of a comfort pick for me because in my mind, Ember first pick is a really dangerous play because he maybe not at this level, but I think at especially at a lower level where like I hear like Legion Commander is viable, whereas at a high level you almost never see her. I feel like Ember has some solid. There are solid ways to counter Ember, whereas so unless you're really comfortable with him, I don't see first picking it being
Yeah.
super popular.
Yeah,
But obviously
let's
they did.
talk like strictly in the terms of what Cloud9 wants to do, because I want to kind of juxtapose the way
Secret.
that. Sorry, yeah, it says Envy on it. That's all I care
Yeah.
about.
The Envy team.
Yeah, the Envy team. That's what matters. So I want to kind of talk about like what makes this good decision making for them, and then kind of compare that to the amateurs. So like in Secret's case, like yeah, so Ember Spirit's probably still not a good first pick or anything in general, but because Envy is so good with it, so like even at this level, like an individual's preference for hero, I think you see like as the teams get better, they have their own more individual play style, and then when you have like a bunch of kind of middle tier teams, like tier 2 teams who don't really know what they're doing, they'll just kind of follow the meta. Maybe they have a couple picks of their own, but you have Secret super well developed. Like they know if they can ever get Ember Spirit Windrunner in the first 2 picks, they just do it.
Yeah. I think like another big part of these picks for them are they're picks that would be banned otherwise, right? So they can't wait to pick them. So it's either you pick it and you have the chance of getting countered, or you don't pick it and it gets banned against you. So you don't get to pick it either way.
Another element of this, well, so there are a few factors that come into this. There's one, you don't want to pick your mid hero and your safe laner in the first 2 picks. Like that's not something you want to do, because like you have first pick, which also gives you last pick, which is absurd and broken as fuck. So and you want to last pick, you want to last pick something because they can't react to your last pick. This is the last pick. It's that's what it is. So you want to pick something that's going to blow them out of the water. Be like, oh shit, we didn't plan for this one. Whoa, last pick Brood. What do you know?
Yeah.
So if you do that, you can't last pick like, whoa, we last picked Lion. There's no way they have any way to deal with the support. Like it's you want to try to last pick a core that blows them out of the water. But there's not that many offlaners that fucking blow you out of the water, and there's not many supports. So you want to try to leave, and you don't want them to, because I mean every mid has a good matchup. So you don't want to first pick your mid if they haven't picked their mid yet. And you probably don't want to get your carry unless you really have all your bases covered and there's no real counter that's going to come out. So like it's definitely clear that they value these 2 heroes enough, and especially value getting them both together. Windrunner and Ember Spirit are actually like, that's a really good 2-core combo. Like Ember Spirit's not the best safe laner, but so Ember Spirit does kind of like AoE damage and does some fight disruption, and Windrunner does a lot of single target damage, and she's not quite as much fight disruption, but she can kind of like be in the thick of it, blink forward, initiate a little bit, Windrun to be safe, and have Ember Spirit in the back doing stuff. So these 2 heroes together, like this is a very well thought out. Like even though it's super shitty to pick a mid and a safe lane hero at the start, they can still do it because these guys are still so complementary. Yeah, like I liked running Ember Spirit and Lone Druid together, so that's what made me kind of think about this.
I think that's something that I definitely because I do a lot of casting and replay review for the .p82L teams, and one thing I definitely always point out is a lot of times people, especially at lower levels, what they'll do in my experience, which admittedly is quite limited, they'll pick 2 supports first phase because they'll think like, oh well, if we pick 2 supports, we're not giving anything away. But I'm of the opinion that picking 2, like whether it's 2 cores or 2 supports, either way is very limiting because it limits your ability to react to the opposing draft. And even if you're trying to dictate the draft, which I think Secret is kind of doing in this draft instance, like they're picking 2 cores and they're saying, all right, you guys have to react to us, and they're dictating like this is how the draft's going to go. Whereas it kind of gives them, it puts them vulnerable to counter, right? But it also gives them, I'm trying to think of like the right way to describe it, but they have some advantage where like they're forcing Mineski to react. Mineski can't just play their style. Mineski can't just be like, oh, well, we have this pocket strat we want to run, and we're going to run it because
that reminds me a lot of in StarCraft. It's not totally related, but there's a
StarCraft's always related.
Yeah, you can play really weird, and let's say you have your own style that's not at all standard. And if the game, if everyone knew what you were doing and it was fully figured out, you would probably lose almost every game. The best example I can figure was Zerg player Katz. One of his favorite things to do is he would just like build a base next to your base, and everyone was like, "What the fuck? Like, why do you have a hatchery right next to my base?" And they have no idea how the fuck to react to it, but you do because you do this every game. So they're like, "Oh, I've never seen this before. I guess I'll do this to counter it." And you're like, "I've been in this situation like the architect from fucking the second Matrix movie. I've seen this 100 times. Like, I know how this works out." And then you counter their obvious reaction. So if you're opening Ember Windranger, maybe there is a really obvious counter to it, but you've played against it so much, like you've been in the situation, it doesn't matter. Like you know how to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think even getting away from like drafting in a captain's mode sense, I think even if you're playing like ranked all pick and you're like, I don't know, Meepo pickers come to mind, where like Meepo pickers, like the really good ones, can play into stuff. Like the other day I played a solo ranked game and we had a guy that was just like, hey, can I pick Meepo mid? It's my main. I really like playing him, and it'll give me last pick. And by some miracle, our team was nice and let that happen. Because normally, you'd have 6 people somehow on your team that all wanted mid. But the other team had like Ember Spirit, had Earthshaker, and Winter Wyvern. And he still picked Meepo, and he played around it, and he was just like, yeah, I've done this like 100 times. I've played against Earthshaker. Like, it's bad for a while, but then you'll learn how to play against it, and he's fine. So I think like this can even be applied to stuff like that. If you play a hero that's easily countered, or like, I don't know, if you play a lot of Invis heroes and you just learn how to play around Dust, like, you can play around things if you get used to it. So, like, if you're going to pick 2 cores and you just know, like, oh, well, we're picking first pick Ember Spirit, and if they try to counter us with a Legion, we're going to do this to counter them. Stuff like that works really well. And gives you a lot of wiggle room in your drafts, I think.
Yeah, and then to go back to how you're talking about picking 2 supports at the start. Your support duo is like one hero, right? It's if you pick a support duo that's really good at ganking, like that's one hero basically that can gank. And so if you pick 2 support, like if you pick 1 support, you reveal almost nothing at all with the 1 support pick, especially like the ever popular like picking Dazzle early. Like Dazzle fits into fucking everything.
Yeah, he doesn't
Nothing
telegraph
matters. Yeah, so like if you pick like a Dazzle and then like an offlaner, like if you go like Dazzle Darkseer, if that's your opening, like they don't know shit about what you're doing. They know that you have some team fight, and they know that it's not going to be super easy to kill you. And what draft doesn't have some team fight and 1 defensive support? That's really not a lot of information. But if you pick Dazzle Vengeful Spirit, they're like, oh, okay, they have like single target damage, easy to avoid lockdown, and might be running minus armor. That's like way more information.
Yeah. And then you think like, not only do you know that information, and you think like, oh, that's what they're doing, but then you can think like, oh, well, what does that make viable on our side? So you can think like, oh, well, they're all single target. If I pick Brood here, they can do nothing about it. Like at best, they're gonna have a carry that deals with Brood. Like, all right, well, maybe they get, I don't know, who's the carry that deals well with Brood? Like a Sven to cleave down bugs. Like something like that.
Gyro or something. Or if it makes Gyro a good, if you can first pick a Gyro and it's a relevant pick, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think that's a really valuable point. Moving on with the draft, I think we see some more reactionary picks. So at this point, we've talked about Ember Spirit Windranger coming out for his team secret, and Mineski picked CoOp Darkseer too. I mean, they picked big team fight. CoOp deals pretty well with Ember Spirit if he gets an early Orchid, or she gets an early Orchid. But then in the second phase, they react with Disruptor Night Stalker.
I do want to add actually. So it was the first pick Ember, and then the CoOp Darkseer came out. So it's like if Ember was mid, CoOp does well against that, and then Darkseer is always a good pick. So I think those are 2 good picks for Mineski. And then they did go with the Ember Spirit Windrunner, but they did that after the mid was revealed for the Windrunners matchup. So they do give away what their 2 picks are, but the one takeaway is like, well, at least we didn't give away, like we didn't let them counterpick our mid. We counterpicked their mid, even though they were probably going to pick that regardless of what they did. So it's not a total giveaway on their side.
I mean that's very pointed argument, especially with the Ember Spirit like that. Even though it is dangerous to pick your core first, it does give you like, oh, it could be a mid, it could be a safe, and that gives you a little bit of wiggle room.
Sure.
But the Mineski's their third pick was Disruptor, and Disruptor does really well with Ember Spirit and Windranger pre-BKB. So I think that's like a really smart. I mean, obviously, it's a smart pick. Like these are professional players, and I'm just some guy with a podcast. But it makes a lot of sense, right? Because not only does it succeed a lot against Ember Spirit, because it's hard to remnant away when you're silenced, and Wind
Yeah.
Ranger, it's hard to run away when you're silenced. But it's those kind of like really reactionary picks that can really be really game winning, even if it is a support. I mean, a lot of people have that stigma against supports, like, oh well, supports are good, but they're not truly like game winning. But in this instance, when you have Disruptor and Night Stalker, they have so much silence and lockdown and pressure to put against somebody like an Ember Spirit that needs a lot of farm and a Wind Ranger that's relatively fragile. It's a really strong draft.
Yeah.
Um,
It just makes me think, like, when you think about counterpicking something outside of, picking a good mid to, counter another mid, like picking OD to counter, I don't know,
anybody.
CoOp or something, or picking Razor to counter OD. Like, outside of stuff like that, your real counter picks are coming from your supports. So that's why, I mean, that's a big reason why it's good to save at least one support pick, because there are two support picks here. Disruptor, super good against Ember Spirit, pretty good against Windrunner too. Night Stalker before Disruptor gets level 6. I mean, Night Stalker is also another counter to Ember Spirit and stops the Windrunner from getting her escape off. So, yeah, like saving their two supports and picking two cores early. I think I like making picking the mid and the off lane and then the two supports after. I think this is really solid from Mineski.
Yeah, and Night Stalker also good against Bane, which was a third pick from Secret. And I believe Gorgon talked about it on one of the Tuesday shows, either this week or last week. But Bane is a hero that we see fairly regularly among other teams, but Secret picks it with like insane frequency compared to other teams. I think Secret, the exact statistic escapes me, and it may have changed now that they've played more games. But they picked it like over 75% of their games, whereas other teams picked it in like maybe 20%. And again, I'm sure those numbers are fairly wrong, but the idea still applies, right? Where like they're really comfortable with the hero and they know how to play around it, therefore it is a good pick. Whereas other teams may not play a lot of Bane, and then it's not a good pick. And again, just like to have some quick application to pub games. I mean, if you're playing, solo ranked, and you think like, oh boy, they just picked, I don't know, if they pick Ember Spirit, and you're like, oh, to keep using my example, you think, oh man, Legion would be great here. But if you don't play Legion, that's not going to work out for you. Like, you gotta draft within the parameters of your skill and your hero pool and your comfort levels. And that's one of the really dangerous things. Like, so on the Monday show, they talked about using Dota Picker a lot.
Sure,
it's just like an easy counter website, and they always know, like, the other day, I remember I was watching the stream, and it was like, oh, well, AA was clearly the pick here. But they were like, oh, well, we don't really play AA. So they just skip over it, and they pick the second one. So I think comfort is definitely something that it's easy to ignore if you see, like, oh, boy, they picked PL, Ember Spirit's the perfect pick here, I should do it. But if you don't play Ember Spirit, your, like, advantage is going to be mitigated by their skill advantage and their comfort level advantage.
Yeah, because I'm, like going back to the time that I killed a Razor on Lone Druid, which I'm never going to get over. I'm sure that dude didn't play Razor that much. He just knew that, like, there's no way Lone Druid wins this matchup. But if you have no idea what the fuck you're doing on Razor, that's the way that Lone Druid wins this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, I don't have any... I can't think of an instance right off the top of my head of something similar, but I know I've won matchups that I should not have won, and stuff like that, where it's just like, I don't know, especially offlane matchups, where like, or me being safe lane and them being offlane, where it's like, oh well, my supports ditched me and I'm playing AM, but somehow I'm dominating this, whatever Broodmother. But it's like, realistically, this should not be happening. But sometimes things somewhere. Basically, sometimes things just work out that way.
One thing I really like about I'm looking at this draft. So there's a few elements to drafts that I always like to think of. Like, what's your core duo? Can your offlaner get anything? Can your supports gank? What kind of like tempo does your team want? And do you have stunning supports? So there's like the theme of your team. You need that to be consistent. You need a core duo that covers all the bases. You need an offlaner that can contribute something ideally, and then when you're drafting, you're always like, shit, do we have stuns? Are there stuns here? But if you look at Team Secret, they have like Beastmaster and Bane, and they have stuns at level 6.
Mhm.
But I mean, they don't have like, you don't just like gank someone and get like Lion Stun Hex and then you're done on this team. But interestingly enough, a lot of times, there's a lot of really appealing supports like Disruptor and Night Stalker who like don't have stuns, but you're like, oh, maybe I can get like they have some kind of, but you say like, oh, maybe I can get something off my carry. Like, one of the cool things about running Sven is you can run some of the greedier supports with him that don't have stuns. But I kind of like how Secret, like, Ember Spirit doesn't really have a stun, but against CoOp, your Q is basically a stun.
Yeah.
And for Windrunner, her Shackle Shot, if you know what the correct PL is, that's actually a kind of reliable stun. So they end up with some pretty good lockdown, even though they don't have stunning supports. So normally you don't think like, oh yeah, Ember Spirit is a stunning core, but since they see, oh, we can do bolas on the Quap, and then she's basically stunned, and the Darkseer is like basically stunned at that point too. It's pretty interesting. Like, I really think stunning supports are important, but at the same time, like, maybe you can kind of throw that away if you have like the correct picks.
Yeah, I think really the crux of that is like you can compensate for the weaknesses of some heroes or some aspects of your draft with other aspects. Where, like, in this instance, using your example, Bane does not have a stun, but he does do great like base damage, and he has good stuff pre-6. So like if Ember Spirit gets Bolus off, then your Bane can do work. And then later on in the game, that's when Bane's stun really comes in handy. Or I'm trying to think of another example in this draft, but the basic idea is, like the Bane again doesn't have a stun, but Wind Ranger does. So those two compensate for each other. Whereas like if it was an SF, then you just have no stuns if you have a gank in mid. So these things really compensate for one another. And I think probably the next really interesting thing I see in this draft would be PL is the last pick from Mineski. Whereas while Team Secret already has Ember Spirit. And typically people think of Ember Spirit as the best counter to PL. Arguably, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some like
Earthshaker. As far as mid heroes to pick, I would say Ember Spirit. Well, he's not played mid in this game, but as far as mid heroes to pick, I think Ember Spirit is one of the best ones to counter PL.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the synergy is fairly obvious. I mean, when you have Cleave, and then you are
lots of units,
when there's a lot of units,
all clumped together.
Yeah.
By just the way the skill works.
Happy Ember.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of comes down to a comfort pick, where Mineski knows like we really like putting who's their carry player? Is Cuckoo their carry player? I think it is. We really like Cuckoo playing PL, so we're just gonna pick it. Like even if there's one counter, the rest of the heroes are not good against PL, so it's fine. We'll just deal with it when that comes. But Team Secret, they respond with Magnus, which I love Magnus, and it was really dominant this game. If you watch it, it was a really good game. But the empowered Ember Spirit, it's wild. And one of the other core things about Mineski in this game was that they were being really aggressive, and they were trying to aggress on the Ember Spirit so that he couldn't get up to that point where he would counter PL, because he doesn't counter PL until he has Battle Fury. And he needs
until you have a Magnus on your team. But
exactly. But when you have a Magnus on your team, who needs a Battle Fury? Because you're just going to cleave anyway. So I think that's a really interesting way to like respond to the enemy. So like Mineski responded by trying to shut down the Ember Spirit in the early game, but then Secret responded by saying like, oh well, even if you shut him down, he's still going to cleave because we have a Magnus. And I just and of course again, like, these are professional players, so obviously they're thinking of tons of other things. But even at a basic level, like, these drafts are really interesting, and this is why I think drafting is such like an interesting thing in Dota that a lot of people don't experience. Because if you only play solo queue, or if you only play unranked, or not unranked, but if you don't play like semi-competitive Dota, like you'll never play Captain's Mode Pro, most likely, unless like you're a crazy person and you can stand those like 30-minute queues. So I think it's like an incredibly interesting dimension of the game that potentially you could just completely ignore.
Yeah, drafting's the best.
Yeah, in simple terms. So I think, unless you have any other closing thoughts on that draft, I think we can move on to some of the amateur drafts and talk about how when we have these perfect, quote-unquote, perfect drafts from pros and very clear thought patterns, then when you go to amateur drafts, they're a little more diversified and they have a lot more personal touches to them, I'd say.
One thing I would like to point out, and this is just fucking brilliant by Secret. So they fourth picked the Beastmaster, and when you think of Beastmaster, the first thing you think is, who the fuck picks this hero? And the second thing you think
OG.
is, well, some people. And then
Cena.
normally he's like off lane, right? I think he's off lane.
Normally, Fada plays him as a mid for Alliance a lot.
Yeah, he's like,
He's
no one knows
wild.
what the fuck they're doing. So if you look at this guy, and then you look at Mineski here, so after they pick Beastmaster, they ban Chen.
Yeah.
And this is smart because like Misery doesn't play any heroes. He plays like Slardar, and then like sometimes they give him Nyx, and then
Nyx was already banned in this game too, so it's like,
yeah.
oh,
So they're like, okay, we ban Slardar and Nyx Assassin, and then they pick this weird other thing. So like maybe Misery can't play shit besides those heroes. Maybe he just likes Beastmaster, and they just pick that for him. So they figure, it's Puppy, ban Chen. Who knows? But it turns out Puppy's playing that, and Misery is playing Magnus. So the fact that they like picked a hero that looks like an offlaner when they really like they had Magnus in mind. Like they're against, they have an Ember Spirit, and then it shows that they pick PL. Like Magnus is the best fucking thing to pick there. But Mineski thought that they already had their offlaner, so they just get a free Magnus.
yep.
There's
Yeah.
no world where they wanted to pick that Chen, or maybe there is. Maybe they were okay with running Beastmaster off lane, or as a solo lane, and pick another support for Puppy. But either way, the way it shaked out is they put themselves in a good position where there was like a decent chance they would get the Magnus. I think it was fucking brilliant.
Oh yeah. I mean, Puppy is a god amongst men. I definitely think, and I mean, you touched on some other more complicated things, but I think at a very simple level, the picking a hero that confuses the enemy drafter has like a lot of merits to it, right? Where like if you're drafting and like who's a hero that nobody plays, if you pick like Elder Titan, the other team's gonna be like, yo, what just happened? Like, did they misclick? Like they're just so unprepared for stuff. So there's a certain element of like if you put your opponent off kilter and you think like, boy, they picked, their support duo is Elder Titan a bad.
Even Night Stalker, like, is he going to be in a dual off lane, or like what is that guy going to do?
Yeah, so there's
I know
definitely
most people like
merits.
playing him as supports right now, but he can be a decent dual off lane anyway.
Yeah, he could be even a solo off lane, although not. It's
Not
he's
super
relatively
solo.
easy to zone, but I mean, when the guy has like 18 health regen at level 1, he can do a lot of things. But yeah, so all right, moving on to, let's see, which amateur draft do we want to start with? Okay, well, I mean, I'll just say one. Okay, so this is your team, and this was a draft. We're going to go over 2 drafts in the same series. Which one was the first draft? Maybe you introduced the draft.
So the
Second
first
one.
draft here is the one that I have Gyrocopter, or rather that the team drafts Gyrocopter. I don't play.
Gotcha.
So we're the Radiant in this situation, and we're going against a team. So this is for I'm playing in the Collegiate Star League, which is the college league of Dota, basically. And this is against the other team that's coming out of my school. So it's a little bit of a grudge match. So they won the first game here. They're dire. We fed them some misinformation that we played Meepo that we thought was a joke, but they didn't think so. They thought that was super serious. So it starts out pretty standard. So they banned Doom, of course, because that's
They banned Meepo both games. That's some like next level out of game meta stuff. I'm sorry. Continue.
sorry. So we are first pick here. So we banned Slardar because Slardar is hype right now, and we wanted to pick Alchemist all along. Because that's one of the so the way our team works is we had a mid player, he wasn't doing so well, and I'm kind of the best core on the team, and I hate playing mid, but that's kind of where I'm at, and I play one specifically. So kind of the context is we want to play a farmer mid. So really that means we want to play Alchemist because I'm not good at Shadow Fiend yet.
Yeah.
So we want to pick Alchemist. So we first banned Slardar, and that's smart because Slardar is not only one of the better counters to Alchemist. AA is honestly the best one. So Slardar's a good counter to Alchemist, and he's high tier. So if we first ban AA, they know we're going for Alchemist. So we ban Slardar first, and it doesn't look too fishy. They ban Doom because and then we ban Undying because if we're playing Alchemist, we don't want to get run over in the first 2 seconds, right?
Yeah.
And then they ban Meepo because I totally play Meepo guys for sure. That's what I do.
That's some malicious stuff, dude. But yeah, I mean, Alchemist definitely, even in pub games and stuff, like he is one of those heroes where if you let him get off the ground, he's really dominant. But
Yeah.
nowadays, like, you just pick minus armor and you just gank him a lot, and like the guy has like he has such a low HP pool before he has items, and he doesn't even build strength or he doesn't build HP, so you just gank him over and over. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really smart thing. Is like you gotta try to avoid telegraphing what you're going to pick with your bans, and having those secure bans like Slardar or Doom makes life a lot easier if you're like being a first, like if you have first pick, because if you have a second pick, you can kind of like you have a little more wiggle room, I think. Whereas if you have first pick, like you first pick Alk, for instance, and they know like, all right, we can respond to that. Whereas if you have the second round of picks, they can only respond with one hero.
Yeah, like if you if you second pick out, or rather not second pick, but if you are second pick, you get to pick two heroes back to back. So let's say Alchemist is open, you can pick Alchemist AA,
Yeah.
and not only have you gotten Alchemist, but you've also kind of taken away the Ancient Apparition
Yeah,
and
it's a
added
block
it to your
pick.
team. Yeah, block pick. That's the term for it. Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there is definitely a disadvantage to picking a hero like an Alchemist, but that kind of goes back to secrets. Like maybe you don't want to first pick Ember, but at the same time, if you can get Ember, that's what you're gonna do.
Yeah. I mean, even in the block picking way, when you have a highly contested hero like Alk, you picking it means that they can't at the most basic level.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not League, fortunately. So I mean, that's definitely a strength. And so continuing on with the draft, I mean, like we touched on, they respond with AA Quap, and Quap is, I think she's really strong in the way that we were kind of talking about earlier with the Night Stalker, where she can go a lot of different places. We see Quap mid generally, but she can also off lane. She can be in the safe lane if you're running some aggressive try or aggressive duo or something. So she has a lot of versatility, and that makes her a really safe first round pick.
Yeah, so there's a kind of mix of things here. Their mid player, who's Don Snow here, he's definitely a way better mid than I am. He plays mid, and he's like 4.8 or something like that, and I'm like 4.5, and I never mid. And Quap is by far, from my experience, at least at my level, the best counter to Alchemist, because kind of the advantage of Alchemist mid is you place ooze or that acid spray in a like strategic location that makes it very difficult for them to get close to the creep wave or interact with you at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then what Quap does is the way that happens is you put it somewhere, and then the only way they can have like a good position is if they just like walk straight through it, and then you can be hitting them while they do that. But if you have Quap, she'll just kind of walk behind your acid spray right up next to you, and then if you kind of get her low or if it looks like a bad position, she'll just blink out of it. There's no such thing as getting a Quap in a bad position where she chooses where her positioning is.
Yeah, definitely.
So she's good against Alchemist. I learned that this game.
Yeah, Alchemist is a really weird mid to mid against, because, and I've done it quite a bit. I don't play Alchemist, but I do play a lot of mids that have to play against Alchemist, and really the trick is to like invade their up. Like if he acid sprays your creep wave behind, you just run up. And you either have to be really aggressive, or you have to be really like off to the side and avoiding it. And it's just a hassle either way, because if you're aggressive, then you run the risk of like, oh well, if you're aggressive and they like snowball on you with a tusk or something, then you're just screwed.
Yeah, so that's what should have happened this game, by the way.
I'm surprised no tusk.
We were going around for it. Yeah, so it's a mix of, my team doesn't really play tusk. Like we have one support who's like 4.5k, and then one support who's like 2.8.
Oh.
And the 4.5 guy is not a good tusk. The 2.8 guy is actually a really good tusk. So we learned that later on. But yeah, so what did end up happening this game was, so the way I think you play the Alchemist versus Quap matchup is you have your supports kind of waiting, and then once the Quap does the like aggressive blink forward to get away from your acid spray, that's when your supports have to act, because the Queen of Pain has to go on the Alchemist at some point. She has to go forward. And you can kind of predict that, but when we ganked, we did the whole Radiant thing where like you walk a really long way and you go up around your Ancients, then you try to gank the Dire guy from like above.
Yeah,
and
it
Quap
never
went on
works.
me during that process, and then I died, and they were sitting there on the fucking Dire high ground like, fuck.
Yep.
So that was that game. But anyway, yeah, so they get the Quap, really good counter to the Alchemist, and then we respond with getting Gyro, because Gyro's a pretty contested carry, and I just wanted something that would give the Alchemist some amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So our context for the team at this point is Alchemist is going to have a hard game. If Alchemist gets farmed, like he's our best core and kind of like our success. So if we can put Alchemist in a good position, we win. So we need to pick anything we can to put this Alchemist in a good position.
Yep. All right, and so then just looking at these bans, were they target bans or I mean, so just to list them off, the Dire team, not Proud's team, banned Dazzle, Winter Wyvern, defensive supports, basically, and
Yeah.
Proud, your team or you banned Spectre, Earthshaker. Were these target bans? Were they bans because you knew what you were picking next, or were they bans because you didn't want them to be played against the stuff you already picked? Because that's like three really different ways of picking and banning, or
Sure.
more banning because you don't really target pick.
So
I
I
suppose
think
you could target pick, but
in their space, so they actually had a pretty good amount of information on us, but we had almost none on them just because they weren't very good at reporting their matches, which hopefully will come back to bite them in the ass. But they so we haven't really played Dazzle or Wyvern. They're always banned. So we haven't picked a single support yet, and Dazzle and Wyvern are two supports that fit into anything. So we're already kind of committed on our cores. There's not really an offlaner picked up for us, but there's also not an offlaner picked up for them, so they don't really want to ban that out too much. So they just say, okay, like of any support duo, I think you'd be better, or I think we'd be better off if you didn't have either Dazzle or Wyvern in them. Although they did have the Ancient Apparition,
I
so
know,
I'm
that's what I
not
was
too
thinking.
sure about banning the Dazzle. I think that was probably a mistake on their part. I think they could have let Dazzle in. But at the same time, if you have AA, there's a 0% chance you're going to pick Dazzle or Wyvern.
I don't know.
Um,
I think Wyvern just for the ult. I mean, Wyvern ult's great against CoOp, and I mean that's kind of like I don't know. It's
Yeah.
one of those things where it's not ideal, but I think this kind of ties into even what we're talking about. Like, you can pick stuff into like a counter if you're really comfortable on it. So like,
Sorry,
I play
I
a ton
think
What?
I may have misspoke. I meant that they're not going to pick Wyvern or Dazzle because
Oh, gotcha.
AA Wyvern. Like, maybe you do AA Wyvern. I'm not super sure. Maybe there's a situation that's good, but I think for the most part you wouldn't pick those two together.
No, that
So
makes
I'm saying that like they won't pick those supports. They still have an offlane to pick. We don't have a carry or a mid to pick. So their only real options are banning out supports.
yeah. Well, I'm just saying like I think banning Wyvern is fine. I think
Yeah, for
banning
sure.
both might be a bit overkill. Because like you wouldn't pick two healing supports into an AA, but I think Wyvern's fine to pick into AA. Anyway, regardless of that, neither of those heroes were picked, obviously. So you guys picked Lion Disruptor, and they picked Darkseer Slark. These obviously you picked your two supports, and were there any like specific reasons for this, or is it just like comfort picks?
Sorry, I want to go back slightly. So the Spectre ban was just kind of we took their Gyra, which was one of the cores we knew they played, and we knew they picked Slark, and we had some plans on how to counter the Slark. And our offlaner has had a lot of success with killing Slarks in the past, so we said we would let that through. And AA Earthshaker, I think that's a good support duo, and we were
Yep.
planning on picking the Lions. So AA doesn't really lend a lot of presence or crowd control to the fights. They had CoOp, which doesn't have any CC on our own, so we figured if they don't have Earthshaker and they don't have Lion, we don't have too much to worry about in forms of lockdown. And the Spectre was just, I think Spectre's really fucking strong, and I like
Yep.
to pick him, or I like to pick her, and I'm not playing her because I'm playing Alchemist, so let's get that guy out of there.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a big Spectre fan, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, the Dire team. I mean, they have a lot of really strong team fight at this point, and
Yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
Slark offers pick off. I mean, between just Darkseer, QoP, AA, that alone, I think, is just like team fight central, right? You have Vacuum, Scream, the not ultimate Scream, and then you have AA ult plus Vacuum, Wall, and then eventually their last pick was Warlock. So they really like doubled down or quadrupled down on the whole team fight thing. Whereas your team, you had a very greedy Alchemist, and then Gyrocopter, he offers some team fight, and then Disruptor Lion, they offer a good amount of control and a good amount of team fight.
It's a little more skirmishy than team fighting, I agree.
Yeah, but yeah, so that's the gist of it. Was there anything else about that game before we move on to the next one that you want to discuss?
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk about their Warlock pick a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
So in terms of the thing I want to kind of come away from here with is how you draft to your team and your team strength. And so on their team they had like one really weaker player. They had like some 2K who just wasn't like low 2Ks, or even like maybe high 1Ks at this point. But so he was by far their weakest player, and they picked him a Warlock because
you press R and you click the ground, and that's Warlock. So the fact that they did draft so team fighty really synergizes with the fact that they have a Warlock on their team. So if this whole time they knew that they were going to pick this weird hero that has nothing to do with anything, and they were kind of drafting around it, I think that's the smartest thing for them to do, because they picked they picked two meta heroes, two very meta heroes, and then one meta counter that all synergize with their one off meta pick. So they kept us pretty in the dark for it, and then they picked up the Warlock, and I think that was really smart.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, I mean, Warlock is not a hero that's going to be banned in any games because, I mean, as the internal .p controversy is always, I hate Warlock, and some other hosts who will not be named love the hero, despite his ability to be utter garbage for 160 seconds out of 165 seconds. But that said, Warlock's not a hero that's ever going to be banned, so it's a really safe last pick because, you know, if you have other heroes that are more contested, like Darkseer is very contested, Quaff's very contested, AA would have been banned second phase for sure if it wasn't picked. So Warlock, you leave it for last pick because, hey, we're going to pick it, and if we don't, like, there's no way they're going to pick it, there's no way they're going to ban it, so you just leave it be. And you guys last picked Clockwork. Clockwork makes a lot of sense, just as a disruptive hero.
We really wanted the Spirit Breaker instead. Spirit Breaker is a really strong counter to Slark. If you just press Q and click on Slark, Slark is never going to regen up. So fucking good. Holy shit.
It sucks. That Slark is... I used to play a ton of Slark, but I don't play him recently, and he has a lot of internal problems. Because, like, in this patch, Spirit Breaker is popular. In last patch, Bloodseeker is popular. And also, like, AoE damage is super popular in both patches. So anytime I want to pick him, I'm just like, boy, this is utter garbage.
So yeah, we did have the Lion and Disruptor to deal with the Slark, but having Spirit Breaker and then also Spirit Breaker against CoOp is nice, and Darkseer, and it's a good time. But so we got kind of forced into the Clock. Clock's not super good against CoOp, not the best against Darkseer. I don't actually really know how I feel about that pick still, but it did kill Slark because our offlaner is fucking awesome.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like that offlane is really good, but then as the game progresses, it's not as good. Like, I mean, Warlock is garbage in lane, so an AA even you could also just kill over and over again.
Yeah, he had a really good time in the offlane. I think the way that you should go from our lineup is you just look for small skirmishes, look to do stuff before AA gets 6 and buy Alchemist as much time as possible. But the failed gank and the turnaround triple kill from the Quap and the gyro dying for no reason several times kind of put a hamper on that.
That'll seal the deal. All right, so let's just quickly move on to this last draft for the last few minutes.
Sure.
So again, we see Alchemist, but this time you have Alchemist AA.
So yeah, if you look at the changes, we banned Coop really early on, and they banned Doom, of course. So that they had first pick this time, so we couldn't pick Alch first. But so Alchemist hasn't been getting picked up super much, and we just lost with it, so we know that there's a chance that it's going to go through this time. So we kind of banned the Co-op because we know it's a counter to Alchemist, but they may chalk that up to just Co-op did really good. Maybe we just don't want to fight against Co-op. So that's not a total giveaway that we just want to ban the counter to Alchemist. And so then they banned Meepo again because, whatever. So we get Alchemist AA, so that's one of the counters gone. And then it kind of goes from there. But they have Shadow Fiend Slardar, so they feel like they're fine if we get these heroes because they have the minus armor to counter it. Yeah,
and I mean Shadow Fiend tons of physical damage. It's a strong combination between Slardar and SF. And I mean, like we said, you cover your bases with having Alch, and you have the counter to Alch, kind of like ideally you would have had in the last game. And then as the draft progresses, we see Darkseer again. Darkseer, like we said, very meta pick, very strong, lane dominator, a lot of team fight. He offers just a lot to a team, really strong. And then as the draft progresses, the Radiant team with the SF Slardar they pick Dazzle and Vengeful Spirit. Vengeful Spirit, of course, as we may have talked about, she's really good against Alch because of the minus armor. Dazzle as well, once a weave gets up there, quite good against Alchemist. So they really draft around it, and they have a clear plan of attack. And then you guys get a Lion again. I think Lion's, in my opinion, a really strong hero as a comfort pick. Like I feel like some people are just Lion players, like Cyphus.
Yeah.
He's just like plays a ton of Lion, and Lion is a very consistent hero, right? Like there's no skill shots. It's just like, all right, I stun.
Well, the stun
I
is a
hex.
skill shot at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah, most of the time. But it's not like as skill shoddy as some other things. Put it that
Yeah,
way.
if you blink on someone, it's not super hard to click on them. And yeah, it's just if you're trying to get a long 3-person stun.
Oh yeah, I mean if you're trying to be an overachiever, then yeah.
You've seen that video. My fucking line does work.
Oh no, I agree. I mean Lion, I'm always very impressed by Lion. I play a lot of Nyx, so I'm no stranger to
Yeah.
the 3 to 5 man impales. But yeah, and so is there anything in this phase? I'm kind of most interested in the last phase.
So the one thing that I would say is so they went very firmly in that minus armor thing, and I think that has some merits. Slardar is a pretty good counter to Alchemist, but at the same time, if Alchemist is playing smart and he's going the Manta build, he can Manta off the amp damage.
Yeah.
So if they don't have the best lockdown, you can Manta off the amp damage. You can also Manta to dodge Venge stun. I'm pretty sure it doesn't dispel the minus armor from Venge, but I can't say that for certain.
I'm pretty sure it does, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I'll not kind of lose my credibility there and just say I'm not sure. Yeah, and Alchemists are like when he ulties, it also has like a small disjoint on it. I'm not sure if that's still there. I'm sounding like a fucking idiot right now, but I think you can dodge Vengeful Spirit's missile as well. So it's like pretty decent, but I actually don't think Venge is. Well, I've played Venge against Alchemist. It's pretty fucking good.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's some easy MMR I've found.
Yeah, the couple times I played Venge recently was against an Alchemist specifically, and yeah, minus armor is pretty good. But yeah, so I guess the thing to say is because I was one of the stronger players like on this team, the fact that their counters were able to be countered by like good execution, maybe not countered, but you were able to mitigate them by good execution. Maybe they should have gone for some counters that were a little more like 100% reliable. Yeah, it's like if their 1.5k person is playing Venge and I haven't manted yet and he throws a stun at me and then I mant it off and then walk away, then they're going to be kind of fucked.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where, and like we said earlier, they like now they're locked in to like they only do single target stuff, and I mean that's not as important in the grand scheme of things. But going by your draft, but in a different draft, it could have gone differently, and you could have seen like if you guys hadn't picked Darkseer, like let's say. Like your last pick was Luna. Let's say you picked Luna line and left your off lane as your last pick. Then if they're locked into Dazzle, Venge, and Slardar, then you could just be like, they do all single target damage. Let's just pick Brood, and you could just run at them with the Brood, and it'd be like, all right, your supports are garbage against Brood, easy win. So that's definitely one of those things where if they're counterpicking you and they're going so all in on a counterpicking strategy. It gives you a lot of little stuff to go against. And so your last pick was Luna, and their last pick was Juggernaut. You guys both left your one position cores to your last picks.
Yeah. If you see there, the gyro didn't work out well for us. Our one player really didn't feel comfortable at all on the hero, so we just wanted to kind of get that out of there. And then they played Slark on the only games we could log. They played both Slark, Juggernaut, and Gyro. They lost the Jug game. They won the Slark and the Gyro one. So we took the two ones that they won on off, and then we kind of knew that they would pick Jug. So we picked another carry that builds Manta that way. So now we have two guys who can dispel the amp damage. And we have illusions to go around to kind of ignore the Omni Slash.
Yeah, I like the Luna versus Jug, and Luna is a really like aggressive mid game hero, whereas Alchemist he takes a lot of time to get kicked off because Luna has Eclipse, and Eclipse is awesome despite its long cooldown. So that's like a really interesting synergy where like it's not like you're picking like I don't know like worst case scenario I can think of is like if you pick a Naga carry and an Alchemist mid like that's you could probably change around the Alchemist build, but the idea is like you don't pick two carries that are that take a long time to get off the ground, and so Luna is a really good counterbalance, I suppose would be the word for an Alchemist.
There's definitely a period of weakness, but it's like Alchemist is going to draw a lot of attention in the early game. Luna actually does really well in the early game by yourself, so the supports can kind of ignore her a little bit. Your level 1 is super strong with Luna Aura and AA, so you can kind of guarantee you get the opening rune for the Alchemist, that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. So their last pick was Juggernaut. Juggernaut makes a lot of sense here, but I don't think there's any like huge discussion point for that unless there's something you think of. Like, I mean, when I think of Juggernaut, I think like, right, the enemy team has a Lion, and I don't want to get stunned forever. They have a Luna, so I don't want to get eclipsed to death, and they have an Alchemist stun that I can dodge. So what is the pick? Juggernaut. Juggernaut, you can Blade through Fury through all of that crap. You can, in your ult synergizes well with all the minus armor because you're going to be punching for physical damage. And, I mean, altogether, I just think Jug is a good hero in this situation.
Yeah, the thing about as a one player, the thing that I always think about is okay, like what carries are good, and the thing about this patch is there's no good carry. They're all kind of shit, which is why people can do things like first pick an Ember Spirit or Huskar as a terror. There's very few good ones right now, and when you think about like okay, pickable one here is like Juggernaut, Gyro, Alchemist kind of, and like Ember Spirit maybe.
Yeah.
I don't fucking know. But yeah, like there's no good carries. And Juggernaut isn't a good carry. He's just the only carry, right?
Yeah.
So in this situation, I don't think he's good. I just think he's the only option.
Yeah, I think probably what I would say is one of the decisive things about this meta is that it's about constant fighting. So you can't pick a lot of the like quote unquote good carries because they take so long to get to that point where they're really good. So, like, you can't pick, like, I don't know, Naga would be my example because I love Naga. But, like, you can't pick a Naga confidently because, realistically, every game is just constant fighting, and you can't deal with that because you need to get your Radiance, and stuff goes bad. And that's why Alchemist is popular, is because he deals with that because he farms things so fast.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So, I mean, that's the gist of it. Do we have any closing notes? We've run a little long, but I think drafting is so vast, like, you know, we could talk for hours. And I mean, we've only scratched the surface, going over a few games, kind of meandering way.
Yeah, I would just say, closing thoughts, pick what you're comfortable with above all else. Don't pick two supports in the first phase. Think about what your supports are going to do, or do you need them to gank? Do you need them to roam? Do you need them to secure your lane? Save a core for the last pick.
Yeah, I agree. I think my closing notes, again, I would echo what you said. I think picking what you're comfortable with is most important. And secondarily, I think establishing a clear plan is key. Like, if you pick 5 heroes, that, like, you can't just randomly pick 5 heroes. You can't just think, oh, we need a carry. Our carry player likes Jug, let's just pick Jug. Like, you gotta establish a plan and think, like, oh, well, let's go for a push strat. Or, oh, let's do a 4 protect 1. Or, oh, our mid lane is weak because it's an Alchemist, so we may need a support that can rotate and to help him in mid, so let's pick Earthshaker. Stuff like that is really important. So I think you really have to establish, like, just a plan of attack, basically.
I'm going to tangent. I'm very sorry.
That's fine. Go for it.
So the one thing that I always think of is you need a kind of flowchart, which we didn't really establish until after Game 3 when we lost because I deviated from the flowchart that I realized I had, but I hadn't really written down formally. But like in our sense, we want Alchemist, but we need to potentially leave him into, you know, like getting second picked by us. We don't want him to, you know, we don't want to first pick him and then get countered by like AA CoOp. So you want to do like, okay, we want to get Alchemist. So we need to, but we don't want to first pick him, so we want to leave him in. So there's a chance that they'll pick Alchemist. Do we have a counter to Alchemist? Yes. So like, you know, we have a strong counter to Alchemist. So it's, do we get Alchemist? If no, engage counter.
Yeah.
If yes, engage Alchemist strat. So like having a flowchart. I've actually had like a decision tree for when like my most serious team. I had a decision tree written out for like, you know, our standard draft when we're not doing crazy pocket stuff, and that sort of thing is like, to actually write through that and kind of think about like, okay, I want to first pick Slardar. What if Slardar is banned? What do I do then? Oh shit, I hadn't really thought of that. That kind of thing. So you don't get into a draft and 2 picks in, you're like, fuck, what?
Yeah.
You banned the one hero I like.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think like probably when I think of when I draft, which again is not super common. I used to do it a lot more in in-houses, but we have not been doing those so recently because darn Valve ruined our guild system. But definitely getting flustered in a draft and like pressured is really not like the position you ever want to be in. Like if you're picking some pocket strat and they ban one of the heroes from your pocket strat, and then you just like shut down, that is never a position you want to be in, right? So if they like, you know, you're trying to run some aggro thing, and you're like, all right, we're gonna third pick Undying, and they ban Undying in the second phase. Like you have to have some kind of recourse. You can't just be like, oh well,
Or like
they
a way
banned
to transition
Undying.
out of it or something.
Exactly, yeah. Like once you're committed to something, you can't just say like, oh well, they banned our Undying, so now we can't run a push strat, so now we're just gonna do a 4 protect 1. But if your
Yeah.
carry is a Vengeful Spirit, you're gonna have a bad time. So I think
Yeah.
you gotta like plan for contingencies, just like anything else.
Literally, that situation happened. Only they didn't ban Undying because we first picked that one. This was like 3 teams ago. We called this one the Flatline Special. It was an aggro tri-lane with Undying, Dazzle, and Pugna. Heal on Dazzles or Undying Zombies is fucking awesome. And then we had some random nerd play mid, and then me on Safely Lone Druid. Because who the fuck bans Lone Druid? Turns out anyone who looks at our match history.
I was gonna say,
So-
yeah. That's
so
like the
they-
one thing I always ban whenever I play games against you.
Yeah, so Lone Druid got banned once, and like I wasn't drafting, I was just in Mumble, like we fucking lost. Like that's
Yeah.
the game. Like what do we do, guys? We lost. Should we just leave? And I was seriously fucking freaked out.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
but
and
then we picked Clinks and we won because Clinks is also really good.
yeah, and the opposite thing happens, right? Where like if you don't ban something and they pick it, that can also happen. Just like I mean, if they pick something that's really good against you, or if they ban something that you plan to pick, but also if you let them pick like a Brood 5th pick is the classic one, or like a Huskar 5th pick.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like, okay, we lost. Like just good game, go next. GG no re. If any of you played Dota 1 and you know your terrible terms, that's what it would be. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the crux of it, and we'll probably have more drafting episodes, maybe a little more organized in the future about maybe some more specific things. But I think this was a good intro to it. So I suppose we'll just go through all our plugs right now. Of course, you can find this podcast at defenseofthepatients.com and iTunes, podcasting apps, etc. You can find us on Twitter. I am at Ursinity and Proud. You're at Proud Dota. No underscores or any of that business.
Yeah.
You can find our YouTube channel at .ptv1. There is no VOD for this, obviously, but I think we will post the screenshots in the show notes on the website. I think that'll be the plan, right? If I remember to ask our illustrious leaders to do so. But yeah, I mean, you find tons of content there. I have replay reviews. We have 82L games. We have a whole number of things to watch. And then our subreddit is r/Defense of the Patients. And I think that about covers it. Normally, I mean, we'd have our classic closing line, but we've not really theorized anything today. We just saw about drafting. So I suppose this has been our draft, and good luck, Godspeed, etc. I should just combine all the closing lines, all the other hosts maybe. Stay strong, whatever.
Live
But yeah,
long and prosper, etc.
yep, basically. All right, well,
The
thanks for
police.
listening. Yep. All right, thanks for listening.
Yeah, get out of here.